The Brexit ship has sailed, and yet on the day after Britain has left the European Union, now starts a new countdown with a nation holding its breath over trade negotiations and the future relationship with the continent. Hello everyone, I'm François Picard. Welcome to a special edition from London, where the future is very much unwritten on this Saturday, February the 1st.
Really gutted, particularly for my two grandchildren. My daughter-in-law is Italian. She's trying to get her settled status. All this nonsense you read in the papers about how easy it is, it's not easy.
The thing is, I'm a nurse, so I worry that we're not going to get our nurses from Europe coming over because we rely on them a lot. But other than that, no. See what happens.
Brexit, and it's been delayed, and now it's happened. Good on Boris.
People from European countries have moved to the north of England and taken a lot of our jobs. People feel very disenfranchised by it. This government is promising to invest in the north of England, and everybody's very pleased about it. So we're hoping that things are going to change.
All right, let's talk about it with our first guest, Chris Yarsley, who's the policy manager for Midlands and the Southwest at the Freight Transport Association. You say 17,000 members?
Across the country, yes.
All right, thanks for joining us here on France 24. Practical question for you. What changes today?
Essentially, not much changes today. We are entered the transition period. That was the part of the agreement, the withdrawal agreement. So essentially all the rules and obligations on both sides remain the same until January the 1st next year.
Remain the 1st. We had this front page article in the Daily Telegraph saying there are going to be border checks. They're coming.
Well, in the absence of a deal, there will be obligations on a third country, which the UK now is, to check goods, both importing and exporting, like there will be in the EU side as well. So that's going to be the case if there is no overall deal put in place.
And if there are border checks, the likes of which I saw the first time I came here in 1972, what will it be like at the port of Calais and other places?
Well, we estimate that a few minutes of delay can cause tens of miles of tailbacks very quick, because the ports are set up for a just-in-time, fast-moving operations. So any kind of delays at the ports will result in tailbacks, which results in delays in goods being delivered, medicines being delivered, car parts being delivered to the factories. So it could have a serious economic effect if there's no deal put in place.
All right, and how much of this is a bit of bargaining bluster?
I don't think it is, actually. When you listen to business, when they talk about it, there are genuine concerns that if, in the absence of a deal, a long-term economic deal between the UK and the EU, there are going to be issues. There is going to be friction at the border where there isn't at the moment. So that needs to be dealt with quickly. We need the UK government to understand what it's going to require of us when we export and import, and also we need to understand what the EU will be asking for, likewise on import and export.
All right, and this all has to be wrapped up before the end of the year?
This all has to be wrapped up before the end of the year, because the UK government has already said they're not going to extend the transition period, which is available for both sides to make an offer. But the UK government has said no, they are going to have it all done and by the end of the year. And we need to know as business what those situations are going to be. You can't just flick the switch and transfer into the new way of doing things if it's not tested. We need to have these systems in place, they're tested and everything.
All right, so one of the keys on this trade deal is free movement of people and free movement of EU citizens. You say 15% of the lorry drivers in the UK are foreign nationals from the European Union. If the government takes a hard line when it comes to the free movement of people, can you easily replace those 15% of drivers?
Well, we hope that they will remain and also stay working for the UK companies. But yes, we have quite big concerns with the proposals set out by the government to put in place an immigration framework that's going to be quite tough for the logistics industry to have access to foreign labour that want to come along and work in this country.
When you look at the services industry, restaurants, hotels, a number of places around the UK that rely on those EU workers, do you think you have a relatively strong bargaining position with the government and pressuring them to keep the rules as they are?
Well, it's our job to represent our members, and we need to keep the pressure on the government, because at the moment there's a lot of discussion around sort of medical staff, nursing, doctors and everything, but the logistics industry is as vital to having the economy of the country, keeping things moving, keeping people moving. So we need to have the workers in place to be able to do that.
All right, moving freight means moving billions of pounds worth of goods, everything from cars to medical services, medical products. One issue which already everybody's talking about, it's a small niche you might say, is fishing. Is that going to hog the conversation over the next year?
It might well do. I mean, the fishing industry has a very strong voice at the moment. However, we are trying to push our voice through to government by raising, issues to do with phytosanitary checks, which is not something we have to do at the moment. But if we are going to be moving the product of the fishing, the seafood, all that will have to have documentation in place, and we don't at the moment know exactly what needs to happen and where these checks are going to happen. And that's what we're asking the UK government to tell us very soon.
And you're kind of caught in the crossfire, aren't you? Because those who just take the raw fish out of the sea and try to sell it, they're for Brexit. Those who process the fish and want to move their canned goods, they're for Remain.
Well, maybe. There's arguments on both sides, and as an association, we didn't take a formal view on the referendum because we have members who have both views.
Both of those views. Let me ask you personally, and yeah, again, you're not taking a position on Brexit, but Chris Yardley, do you feel like you're a European?
I'm in a very fortunate position to have also Belgian citizenship, so I do feel like European, and I will remain an EU citizen as well, as well as a British citizen.
All right, well, best of luck and good luck with what's going to be a busy year, it sounds like.
It's going to be a very tough year for negotiations, yes.
All right, Chris Yardley from the Freight Transport Association, thank you for being with us. And it's going to be a busy year here, and there's a sense that this people on both sides of the fence, as Chris was saying, is palpable everywhere, nowhere more so than in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where a majority voted for Remain.
Who knows? I mean, our Prime Minister doesn't know. So who do you expect a poor boy like me to know?
If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said, what's the point in leaving? Because everything was all right and it worked. But now it's happened, we just have to go with the flow.
I've got concerns what it means for my budget on a monthly basis. You hear all the talk about free trade and movement of trade and trade agreements and that type of thing, hard border, soft border, Irish sea border. It's all very, very strange and very unclear.
For more, let's cross to France 24's Chris Moore, who's in Belfast. Chris, what's it like the day after?
Well, it's certainly a lot more subdued in Belfast than some of the scenes we saw in London and Edinburgh yesterday evening. We've encountered a number of emotions over the last couple of days, some of which you heard there. First of all, this sense of resignation, really, that Northern Ireland, this small corner of the United Kingdom, the vote largely took place elsewhere, but it's to an extent, as they see it, Northern Ireland, which has been left to deal with some of the weightiest consequences. A lot of uncertainty also, particularly from businesses, tradespeople, about what kind of agreement will eventually emerge when the UK de facto, in terms of fact on the grounds, leaves the European Union if Boris Johnson gets his way at the end of the year after the transition period, but also a sense of relief, I think, in terms of what was part of that debate over those 3 years, namely the prospect of a hard border with the Republic of Ireland, the threat that it was thought to pose to the Good Friday Agreement. If you look around Belfast, the security situation has improved dramatically since 1998, but there are still reminders of the past everywhere. Neighbourhoods, Protestant and Catholic, are divided by walls. Murals celebrating paramilitaries of the past, etc. All of these are very fresh memories, and it's a past nobody really wanted to return to. But obviously the new border arrangements are going to throw up their own set of challenges, and people are concerned about that.
Hey, Chris, next Friday there's going to be a general election south of the border where you are in the Republic of Ireland. Is that something that matters?
Well, first of all, Francois, one of the things that Sinn Féin have been turning the volume up on recently, not surprisingly perhaps, is saying that now is the time to start moving towards votes on a united Ireland. What's more, they say they have a growing section of public opinion on their hand. They claim that on their side, they claim that demographics are moving in that direction. And what's more, of course, they now have the prospect of remaining part of the European Union as part of a united Ireland as an incentive for people who feel strongly on that issue. There is still quite a lot of criteria that need to be fulfilled before we move towards those votes, including assent in London. But as you mentioned there, what goes on in Dublin is part of the equation. And down there, the two traditional parties, including Leo Varadkar's Fine Gael, according to polls, are under a little bit of pressure, and Sinn Féin are likely to offer their help in terms of coalition, offer their support, but in terms of, in return for that support, obviously, they're going to ask for some of their demands to be met. So Brexit in Northern Ireland has thrown up a lot of new problems, a lot of new challenges, but at the same time, it's also thrown the focus back on, rekindled some older issues.
Chris Moore reporting live from Belfast. Many thanks for that update. We were talking earlier, practically speaking, what happens now when it comes to goods and services. Practically speaking, what happens now for foreigners? We're with pleasure to welcome Nadège Alezine, editor-in-chief of Ici Londres. It's a play on words because during World War II, on the BBC, when they were sending out messages to the resistance, they would say "Ici Londres" is how they would start them. You're a magazine for the expatriate community. If the French of London were their own city, they'd be the 6th largest city in France?
Yes, exactly. We're supposed to be 300,000, 400,000 French only in London itself, so it's a large community of French-speaking people.
Including you, Nadège. How long have you been here?
So I've been living in London for 11 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
We've been living here for 11 years.
Yes.
And when you arrived here, remember it was the period when Time magazine had Cool Britannia on its front cover,
yes.
And this was the place to go?
Yeah, it was the place to go. We knew that we were welcome as European to come and stay in the UK and in London and to get a job. It was everything was kind of easy. London is such a cosmopolitan place. Everybody wanted to be there and be part of the buzz. And so, yeah, it was a very different London.
It's still a cool place. I mean,
we've
been walking around the last 48 hours. London's
Yes.
a very cool place. Nonetheless, is it going to stay cool? First, let me ask you personally.
Yeah.
What's your status?
I have the settled status. So I got it, I applied 2 weeks ago.
Just 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, and in 10 days I got the reply. So it's very straightforward.
So if you're a French citizen, run us through it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a French citizen living
Yeah.
in London, what are the steps you have to undertake?
So take your passport and your national insurance number. Then you take your iPhone or Android phone. You go to the application that Home Office invented for this purpose. And you just put your date of birth, scan your passport, and you just reply to a few questions. It's very quick. I think it takes like 10-15 minutes if you're a bit slow like me. And then you're sorted. You just have to wait for the reply from Home Office.
It sounds a lot faster than for my British colleagues when they're applying in France. But of
Yes.
course there it's the question, and it's the same one here.
Yeah.
Do you apply or not for citizenship?
But I don't think I need to, because with this scheme, it means I can still live, work, and get the NHS in the UK as a European. So, of course, I can't vote, only on election like Mayor of London and stuff like that, local election, that's what I meant. But no, I mean, unless I really need to become British to keep on doing what I'm doing now.
Are there fears in the French community that status may change, that settled status down the line may not be enough?
I don't think so. I think
turn this way.
Yeah, sorry. I think the French people are trusting as well of the British government regarding their rights in some ways. We are part of London or the UK. We've been working there, paying taxes. We bring something to the culture as well, probably in terms of gastronomy as well, and tech. I mean, the French entrepreneur or the French entrepreneurship in London and in the UK is very strong. So, and we have a savoir-faire to bring as well to the UK. So, no, I think people are trusting.
Has this been an ordinary Saturday for you?
No, because I'm with you. So on Saturday I will be doing something.
No, but when you woke up this morning, what did it feel like?
No, nothing. No? I think the shock was on the day of the result of the referendum in 2016. I had 3 years to get ready for.
But in those 3.5 years since that referendum day back in June of 2016. It feels as though the vitriol hasn't gone away, that this is because Britain to us always seemed like this very tempered place, moderate compared to French politics. Now it's no longer the case. Can it go back to being the way it was?
I think there's a strong division in the country, and it's very heartbreaking for me because I live here because obviously I love British people and their sense of pragmatism and a sense of humor. And I can see that so many people are the British people are divided on this question. Even in the same families, people don't talk to each other anymore because of Brexit, because some voted leave and some voted remain. And I think it's heartbreaking, really. But yeah.
And when you hear some politicians say that the EU has tried to blackmail Britain in the negotiations, what's your response to that?
It's very difficult to say. I think you have to know when you live in the UK as a foreigner and as a European that the UK have a special relationship with this country. I mean, so let's hope that they can negotiate something which is good for the UK. Let's hope that the NHS is not going to have to, shut down. I mean, it's just like finger crossed.
Keep the fingers crossed.
Yeah.
What we have seen, those 3.5 years have taken a bit of a toll in the sense that on the French side, we've seen, for instance, real estate prices pushed up in the Paris area because the usual circle of people who go from London to Paris, they haven't been coming to London because there's been so much uncertainty. That uncertainty could continue.
Well, I think from now on the uncertainty is kind of ending because the thing that was really worrying people is not to know if we were leaving or not. Because even if the result of the referendum was saying we want to leave, there was 3 years of political chaos where we had the Westminster shut down, the change with the Prime Minister. We didn't have a Prime Minister for weeks after the referendum. And it was
but with so
chaos.
many French people who work in banking, for instance, they don't know yet what the status is going to be in the end.
I think, I don't want to be cynical, but we know that the path that the UK chose is going to be like an open market, and I think for business it's pretty good. It's for the people it's going to be difficult, but for businesses, for banks, I think they are kind of happy of having it both ways.
So Nadège Alizine,
yes,
your future is still here in the UK?
Yes, I hope so, yeah.
You hope so?
You never know what can happen. Maybe I can find a job somewhere else. But no, I would love to stay here. I'm happy here.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, the magazine is called Ici Londres, and it's for the expatriate community here in London. Nadège Alizine, thank you for being with us. Yeah, the question of what happens next is something that's being mulled over, of course, on both sides of the channel. France 24 sat down with the former president of the European Commission, who looked back at what could have been and thought about what happens next.
This is a sad day for the European Union. It's a tragedy in front of history. It's ahistoric what is happening. I said the morning after the referendum that this referendum, although I didn't like the outcome, will not put into danger the existence of the European Union. It will not.
France 24, you cannot but invite somebody called Peter French. Sorry, I had to make that joke. Peter, on Friday, as they were counting down, you were organizing a march called À bientôt EU, see you soon.
Yes.
Is that still your view, see you soon?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, hold the mic closer there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt that we will rejoin. I don't know how long it will take, but I firmly believe we will. And so yesterday, in amongst all the vitriol, I wanted to do something that was respectful. I wanted to to thank the EU basically for letting us be part of this family of nations for 47 years, and to say we're sorry for what's happening now, but we hope we'll see you soon.
The former British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has been speaking in the press, and he was an ardent Remainer and still is. But he says it's counterproductive to dwell too long on what is now reality. And he says that Britain cannot be a global superpower, but can be a global power and can have influence on the world stage. We need to think now about the future and not try to turn back the clock. Do you agree with that?
I don't know that I do, actually, and I'm surprised that he's said that today, considering he said up until now that he didn't think that Britain could go it alone.
He said right now it's about striking the deal, the best deal possible that keeps the UK as much aligned as possible with Europe and is the most pragmatic deal.
So then that depends on what happens. There are lots of people saying that it's not possible to get a deal, the trade deal that he wants by the end of this year. What that means, if that means we have a hard Brexit, that's going to change a lot of things here. We're going to have to wait to see how things unfold. It's going to take time, but I still believe that it's worthwhile trying to forge better links with the EU, to actually try and change the untruths of the referendum to people in this country, so they understand the truth about the EU and why it was formed, and the values of it and the benefits of being part of this family of nations. And today it's really sad. It's really sad that we've come out of this. It's sad for the young people. It's sad for the next generation. They're suddenly going to be denied choices that I've had for 40 years, and I don't think that they fully understand yet what they've lost. Now, whether we can go it alone, I don't know, but it seems to me in this world, it's so precarious now. We're actually we're stronger together with other nations rather than trying to go it on our own.
Okay, the Prime Minister, whether you voted for him or not, he acknowledges that his job now is to try to heal the country and bring together these families that are divided. We heard our previous guest, Nadège Alezine, describing how people and families are not speaking to each other. How do you do that? How do you heal Britain after this very divisive referendum and all that's ensued?
To be honest, I don't know. And actually, what I witnessed yesterday makes me think that I'm not sure that it can be healed. And I think it's going to take a long, long time if it ever can be healed.
What did you witness yesterday?
I witnessed vitriol, viciousness, vile behaviour I've never seen in my life. When we were assembling to gather on this procession, it wasn't a march. I was very clear. I did not want to make it a political march yesterday. We were actually just forming a group of friends, saying goodbye to friends. But the attacks on us were like something I have never witnessed in my life or seen. And I don't know where that anger comes from, that Leavers or Brexiteers, not all of them, but some of them are so angry as if we've done something, and yet they've won. They've got what they wanted. Now, I respect the result. I respect the result of the election. I'm not going to try and change that. But it doesn't mean that I can't still work towards wanting to rejoin at some time for the next generation, for young people, because I still believe that's what we need. That it benefits us more to be part of this.
So, your day job is musician?
It was, yes. I'm a professional singer. The Guardian described me as professional singer turned political activist. I will go back to singing, but this took over my life. I didn't expect it to.
So what's next for you personally? What do you see yourself doing?
I don't know, because it's very hard. I've been doing this for 3.5 years. Literally, this consumed my life. It's very hard to suddenly stop. But again, I have to respect the election result. But I will still try and keep close links to the EU for this country. I've got a meeting next month in Geneva with a friend to look at what we can do to actually help the pro-EU movement in this country. It's the biggest pro-EU movement in the whole of Europe now in this country, and that's worth not only celebrating but actually continuing to do the work we've been doing. Now we have to do it in a different way. But actually, I still think it's worthwhile still campaigning. It's at some point in the future, that we will rejoin.
That's not going to happen at least for another 5 years.
No, true.
And so, during those 5 years, what do you do? What do those who feel pro-EU sentiment do?
I think.
And is part of that reaching out to those on the other side of the divide?
Yes, I think that's what we have to do. We have to reach out without trying to patronise or tell people they didn't know what they were doing. They did know what they were doing. We have to respect that. People knew what they were voting for. Healing the divide, I don't know. It's going to take a long time. I mean, after all, I have to say that Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage caused that division. They can't suddenly just say we've got to heal it now. They actually caused that division. They've actually made things worse, and they will not take responsibility for that. And one day they're going to have to, because the situation in this country, it's not good. This is not,
It's something that's, of course, going to how it plays out, and we shall see. Peter French, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
here
very
on
much for
France
inviting me.
24.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being with us. Nadia Sharby has more. Our special edition continues.
Thank you.
France 24. Every art form.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. Your needs are changing, and so is France24.com. With articles, reports, the latest international news, all our programmes available on replay, together with live broadcasting 24/7. Intuitive, fast, and available in 4 languages. France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Hello and thank you for joining us on France 24. I'm Nadia Sharby, and before we go back to our special edition on Brexit the day after, let me tell you more about our main stories this hour. From elation to resignation, a divided Britain enters the post-Brexit era, and officials in London and Brussels strap in for the next challenge. The two sides will now have to build a new economic and diplomatic relationship, with talks starting in March. In a first signal of the tug-of-war to come, the Daily Telegraph reports that Boris Johnson is preparing to impose full customs and border checks on all EU goods entering Britain starting next year. As the death toll reaches at least 259, China faces deepening isolation over its coronavirus epidemic. The US and Australia lead a growing list of nations imposing extraordinary travel bans, And airlines suspend flights to China. Among the latest, Delta Airlines says it's accelerating this process, with its last China-bound flight landing this Saturday and its last return flight taking off tomorrow. And speaking at an Arab League meeting in Cairo, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas threatens to cut all ties with both Israel and the US, including on security. The Palestinians reject the White House's controversial Middle East peace plan as heavily favouring Israel. According to the deal, Palestinians would be granted limited self-rule in parts of the occupied West Bank, while Israel would be allowed to annex all its settlements there and keep nearly all of East Jerusalem. Well, let's go now to our special edition. Now, let's start our special edition with the latest first tangible consequences of the divorce between the UK and EU. The French Agriculture Ministry says this Saturday its country's fishermen have been temporarily banned from entering the waters of Guernsey. This due to post-Brexit administrative changes. Now, while authorities say they do expect to resolve this issue in the coming days, the hold-up might be a taste of things to come, as officials are preparing for the long and high-stakes discussion over post-Brexit relations. Meanwhile, the night was a momentous one for both Brexiteers and Remainers, who marked the fateful moment in a variety of ways. Camina Delec takes a look now at those who've been celebrating what they welcome as a newfound independence for Britain.
The clock counted down the end of an era. Much to the joy of the crowd of Brexit supporters gathered in London to celebrate, and of Brexiter-in-Chief Nigel Farage.
The fact is that the war is over. We have won!
For many people here, it's not just about opposing the European Union, but about respecting the referendum result.
We all knew exactly what we were voting for, and today, democracy has been delivered in this country.
Even though the Yorkshire city of Leeds narrowly voted to remain in the 2016 referendum, the countdown there ended in fireworks and cries of freedom. And Brexit-themed parties saw the Union Jacks out in full force.
We're a strong country, and I think being out of the EU is a wonderful thing for us.
In Blackwood in South Wales, locals celebrated in that quintessential British way by going down the pub. Even in the Remain stronghold of Northern Ireland, where 56% of voters chose to stay in the European Union, the day was cause for song and celebration.
We are very proud to be British, and we want to be part of an independent nation.
But now Britain has the tough task of defining the UK's future relationship with the EU. Many details of what that could look like will be hashed out over the next 11 months.
Well, this historic moment has, of course, left the country deeply divided. Let's take a listen to a few Remainers reacting to this new normal.
Transition period is productive. We will have trade deals with the people, which similar to what we had with the EU. If not, we will be worse off. I think we voted to be poorer, personally.
It's just not going to go well, because I think people are saying, oh, well, it ends the uncertainty. I think that it just brings more and more uncertainty, because no one really knows what's going to happen. I think recession, it's all going to end in tears.
Well, that divide is nowhere more apparent than along the border between Britain and Scotland, as over 60% of Scots voted to remain in the EU, and the possibility of a new independence referendum is now looming large. For the latest, we can cross now to our reporter, Catherine Norris-Trent, who joins us from Edinburgh. Catherine, hello, thank you for being with us. Are Scots resigned or combative in the face of Brexit this Saturday?
Well, a lot of Scottish people here in the capital, Edinburgh, are feeling combative in the wake of Brexit. We've seen groups of pro-European, pro-independence protesters outside the front of the Scottish Parliament, Holyrood, again today, a smaller number than on Brexit night. But they say they're going to keep up with their message. A lot of people here deeply disappointed and frustrated about being dragged out of the EU, they say, against their will. And this has become inextricably linked, this message now, with the push for independence. It's breathing new life, they say, into the battle to make Scotland a fully independent state, to make it break away from the rest of the UK. and then try and rejoin the EU. So obviously that would be a long and complicated road, but the protesters here say they are not giving up. They feel that they've got momentum on their side. They're going to be holding several protest marches throughout this year, and they're seeming quite buoyant in the wake of Brexit so far.
How will Brexit translate for Scotland, Catherine?
So Brexit applies to Scotland in the same way that it applies to the rest of the UK, even though a majority of people here, 62% in the referendum, voted to remain in the EU. That hasn't been taken into account. It's the overall UK vote that applies. So Scotland has, as of 11 p.m. local time on Friday, left the EU. Now, a lot of people here are disappointed about that and want to rejoin. That could be a long road because, as it stands, Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister in Westminster, absolutely, of course, has no intention of doing that. So a lot of Scots and Scottish National Party, the ruling party here and the party that dominates the political scene, winning 48 out of the 59 Westminster seats here at the December elections. Well, they are campaigning vociferously for an independence referendum, but that doesn't necessarily have the backing of Westminster. So Nicola Sturgeon now has a constitutional puzzle, a brick wall in front of her, because she legally cannot do anything to force Boris Johnson to give her a referendum, so she's trying to keep the pressure up. In a speech on Brexit Day morning, she disappointed quite a lot of her supporters by saying she wanted to do this legally, saying it would take some time, asking for independent supporters to be patient. She said she had to be in this for the long haul and try and work out a way of doing this legally, not at all going down the Catalonia route and calling any kind of wildcat independence referendum.
And is London making any overtures to Edinburgh in the hopes of keeping it on board?
So far, we haven't seen any overtures from London at all. The message from the government down in London is that they are working to level up the whole of the UK, but that is not playing out very well at all here in Edinburgh and across other parts of Scotland. The Conservative government is deeply unpopular here, and the man at the head of that government, Boris Johnson, is even more unpopular than the government as a whole. He kind of personifies everything a lot of Scottish people don't like about England and English people. He's seen as arrogant and elitist. People say he doesn't represent them. So he said he's going to unite the country, but he's got his work cut out to try and get Scottish people on board.
Voted 62% to remain in Europe. Why is Scotland so pro-Europe?
Now, Scots will tell you, has a long pro-European tradition, goes back to the old alliance with France. In fact, they say they've been working with European countries, including France, for longer than they've been working with the English. The union politically uniting England and Scotland only dates back around 300 years officially, of course, although there have been links, historic links, way longer than.
We appear to have lost our connection there with Catherine Norris-Trent in Edinburgh. We might go back to her a little later. Now, if you thought the drawn-out battle over the UK's departure from the EU was painful, what comes next isn't likely to be any easier. And the stakes are high for London, as Europe accounts for 54% of Britain's imports and 43% of its exports. Negotiations aimed at forging a new economic relationship between both sides are expected to start in early March, once London and Brussels have staked out their respective positions. And the process could be further complicated by the UK carrying out parallel and potentially contradictory talks with the United States. Colin Kinborough has more on some of the challenges ahead.
A new day, a new round of deadlines for deciding the European Union's future ties with the UK. Britain and the EU now have until the end of 2020 to negotiate their new relationship. In particular, a trade deal, which analysts say could be even harder to agree on than the initial withdrawal.
So there's a massive agenda to be agreed: trade in goods, trade in services, data protection, security cooperation, aviation, road haulage, fishing. You know, the list is endless.
One fundamental challenge: product standards. Downing Street hopes to maintain zero quota, zero tariff trade across the Channel. But the EU says that would require the UK to pledge zero dumping. That is, not to lower social and environmental standards to outcompete the EU.
The more the UK diverges from EU standards, the less access to the single market it will have.
Another key sticking point, fisheries. Many British fishermen feel their waters have been plundered for decades by European rivals. Then there's Gibraltar. Thousands of Spaniards cross into the tiny British territory every day to work. Gibraltar's chief minister expressed optimism Friday that this would continue. But it all hangs in the balance of the upcoming talks. Gibraltar's challenge is a window onto a much larger one: freedom of movement between the EU and the UK. Not only has Downing Street vowed to end it for new arrivals, but questions remain for the nearly 3 million Europeans living in the UK already, and the 1.2 million Brits in the EU. Some have expressed worry that they could be used as pawns in negotiations, though the UK has already said long-time European residents will be able to stay. A loaded agenda for the talks set to begin in early March.
Well, with me in the studio, I'm joined now by our guest, Sébastien Maillard, who's director of the European think tank, the Jacques Delors Institute. Hello, thank you very much for being with us.
Hello.
As well as Nadia Massey from our International Affairs Desk. Thank you for being with us, Nadia. Let me start with you, Sébastien Maillard. What lessons can the EU, its members and also officials take away from what has been a painful process this far?
It was indeed a painful process, but what was not so painful is that the 27, as we now have 27 member states in the EU, remained together. Remember that after the referendum in June 2016, we all thought that there would be some kind of domino effect, that Netherlands perhaps would try to also go on its own way, and France also had the presidential election, and Marine Le Pen going out for a sort of Brexit, many of the other candidates as well, and nothing of that happened. On the contrary, I think Brexit wasn't very appealing and looks a bit spooky. So I think now the best lesson of Brexit is that no one wants to leave, not even Mr. Orban in Hungary or the Polish Prime Minister or Mr. Salvini in Italy. He also even wants to keep the euro. So I think Brexit has cooled down any temptation to imitate that kind of, that's the first lesson. I think the second one is that thanks to Brexit, if I may say so, the EU looked, I think it was the lesson of how the EU really works. I mean, we've been discovering through all these discussions what the single market means, what the citizenship of the EU really means. I mean, many of the Brits now are looking to become, find a way to have some Irish roots or some other roots to find some kind of way to remain an EU citizen. The customs union also, so it was a sort of a pedagogical lesson of what the EU concretely means, and I think all this was sort of invisible or taken for granted over 47 years, and then all of a sudden when you're about to leave, then you rediscover what it's all about. So I think the fact that the EU exists concretely in real, and the fact that the 27 remained together, show that the EU exists. I mean, remember that we always said Brexit means Brexit. I think that's what Theresa May kept on saying. And I think through these year of discussion, we show that EU means EU. And I think that's the best lesson we can take of it.
It's an interesting point of view, this spotlight put on the EU.
Even the emotion in the
Yes, what's interesting is, but it's been a very emotional journey, hasn't it? And we've seen the reactions.
Yes, I was in Brussels yesterday, and of course I know Brussels is not like the rest of the EU. You could tell there was lots of emotion, and I think it means that leaving the EU as a member state is not like leaving, say, the OECD or the UNESCO or any kind of international organization. No, I think EU means much more to this, and I think through this painful and I think very sad and disappointing UK leaving the EU, it shows that there's more to it. It's not just rational. And I think one last lesson I think is very important is that despite all the fact that the UK, I think the Brexit is a very sad thing happening. Well, since it is happening, and it can happen without any violence, without any army entering London to keep it there, I mean, it showed that the big demonstration that the EU is not a prison, it's not an empire. That it's a matter of willingness. And if you don't want to be a member anymore, there is an Article 50 of the European Treaty provision we thought it was just something theoretical, but we should now have the proof that it can happen. And I think even for the rest of the remaining countries, I think it's nice to know that you're not because you stay here. It's because you want it. It's not because you have to or you have no other choice. It's really because you want it. And I think it's a good democratic lesson. The democracy of the referendum is respected, the outcome, whether you like it or not, but also the fact that the EU is not an empire where member states are just jailed inside it. I think that makes lots of sense as well.
It's a club. People are free to come and go. That idea of, you don't know what you've got till it's gone goes both ways, Nadia, though. How much international clout has the EU lost by losing Britain?
Plenty of international clout. I mean, I do think you're absolutely right, Sebastian, that we have seen the EU unify in the past 3.5 years. We used to talk about Frexit, France exiting the European Union, Italy exit, a little more clunky, but Italy leaving the European Union. We don't talk about that in the same way anymore because we have seen sort of how torturous and how difficult it is to leave the EU. And that has meant, I think, you're right, the EU has become more unified, more solid as a bloc. But let's be clear about this. Internationally, globally, the EU, of course, will be losing clout now. We're talking about the equivalent of the United States losing Texas, such as the economic power of Britain to the rest of the EU. It means the EU will be a diminished force when it comes to negotiations on climate, on trade, on security. It's losing a seat on the United Nations Security Council. Now, all of that said, though, I think when you look at some of the foreign policy decisions that Boris Johnson's government has taken during the kind of last couple of months of the Brexit process, you can see that politically it is still trying to an extent to align itself with Europe, at least compared to the United States on issues like the Iran nuclear deal, for example, on Huawei and 5G, on climate as well. You can really see that Britain wants to say ideologically, politically, we're still not too far away from you. But yes, let's be very clear, until the very last minute, the EU was still kind of hoping Britain wasn't going to leave. There was going to be that second referendum. The EU is Britain's largest trading partner, but that trade goes both ways, and the EU really didn't want to see this.
But that idea of aligning with Europe rather than the US perhaps rather depends on Donald Trump as well. I mean, the next US president might be more of a pull if there is a next US president and Trump isn't re-elected. They might have more of a draw for the UK, in which case the EU will be losing again.
No, definitely. I think there's a dilemma there for the British government on which side it wants to go. And of course, Brexit now can be done as it has been achieved overnight. But I mean, in which direction the UK will go, it will be very interesting to watch over this so-called transition period. And I fully agree with what Nadia has just said about the fact that EU is losing a big member. I mean, with all the respect I may have for Slovenia or Malta, or it's not just any so-called small country leaving. We're talking about a huge member leaving, and of course the single market is sort of shrinked now. We used to say that the EU is over 500 million citizens, consumers. Now it's 466. So I mean we've got under that threshold. So of course for the EU it's a wrong signal, bad signal sent to the rest of the world that a big member is leaving. We'll be talking over the coming months also about enlargement, further enlargement, because as you know, some Western Balkan countries are knocking on the door, and I think it's interesting for the narrative also to see that the EU is still very attractive. And even we saw how the Scottish, I think, remain very, have the big desire to remain in the EU in a way. But yes, we need the UK to side with us to the EU if we want a more geopolitical EU to not go the Chinese way or the American way, but do it the European way. We will definitely need the UK on our side, and I hope this period coming up will be a proof of that.
Is Europe likely to go and court the Scots? I mean, we mentioned the Scots a little earlier, Scotland wanting to remain in the EU. Is it likely to go and court them, or is it going to let that happen in its own corner before deciding what to do about it?
Well, that's really up to the Scots to do this. I mean, I think the Michel Barnier and all the other Brussels officials will never enter into this discussion as they didn't do with Catalonia or any other, because the EU is made up of member states, and you negotiate with.
But this is no longer a member state.
So Scotland is not one, and so it's. But I think Brussels will prevent itself to get into that. Then, if Scotland was to become a state, then like we have, like with Kosovo, for instance, well, then that, and it's recognized by all the others, then that will be another story. But we're not there yet at all.
And you mentioned how Europe has been put in the spotlight, and also has come out united in a way. I mean, it's a high price to pay, but it has come out united. Is it likely to stay united in this next phase of talks?
That's the big, that's what we'll have to see in the coming months. I believe that even the closest ally of the UK, like the Netherlands, Denmark, or Ireland traditionally, for them it's important to also, and for all of us, to show that if you're not a member anymore, then it's another story, and you cannot have the best of both worlds. And I think everyone on board, for budgetary reasons, for economical reasons, for trade reasons, want this Brexit to have some meaning also, and that the UK cannot have the best of both worlds. So I think I trust that we will remain united, but it all depends on the kind of divergence the UK will want to have. The thing is that the more they diverge, and I think it was already said, the less access they will have to the single market, and so at the end of the day, it may become more painful for them, but also make the Brexit a bit more pointless, because it will be, as you rightly said, it's a big trade partner for both parties. So I tend to believe that the 27 will remain united, also because it's in the purpose of all of them, in their interest, to have a common front. We really thought that this division would have happened before, and I think we witnessed that everyone has understood that belonging to this union meant a lot.
It means a lot, but there's also been a lot of talk about the EU needing to reform. Mm-hmm. Does Britain's leaving also sort of add to the momentum on reform? Is that going to change?
Well, there's going to be this conference on the future of Europe will be launched probably on the 9th of May, and to try to see this reform needed. The policies, I think it's already happening in the sense that there's going to be a review of the competition policy of different. We see the external dimension, the geopolitical reason that the EU needs to stand up to. So it will be happening, but we will see, even with the UK leaving, it will not be easier to make decisions among the 27, because some member states would sometimes hide behind the UK, like the Netherlands or Germany on other aspects, or side with them. Now the UK will not be there to veto by itself, and others may come forward, and so I think we will discover some new attitudes in the European Council regarding this.
That'll be interesting. Now, it's easy to see this as a win for Boris Johnson, but more than that, is it not a win for Farage and the far right more broadly in Europe?
I suppose it is a win for Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party in the United Kingdom, in that patently this was the purpose of the party and Nigel Farage's political campaign for the last several decades, actually, to try and bring Britain out of the European Union. And I suspect it looked for him for a very long time like a pipe dream. You know, they didn't think that this was going to happen.
Cameron made it happen for him.
The political mobilisation changed sort of rather unexpectedly for Nigel Farage. But, you know, he's also out of a job now. We don't quite know what he's going to do. He's lost his seat in the European Parliament. But I'm sure he'll still find a way to campaign and push Boris Johnson to make sure that he gets precisely the kind of Brexit that he wants. So, yes, I think you're right. It is a win for the far right, for populism, for Nigel Farage. But I do think it's a win for Boris Johnson as well. Like, he now will be entering a kind of 11-month period where I think he's going to be able to look as if he's kind of pleasing everybody at once, just for a little bit of time, because we're in the transition period. That means economically not very much is going to change. But politically, legally, he can say, I've made that cut, and we won't have to see those difficult negotiations going on for a while. But when we start getting into those trade issues, we'll see some of the real challenges emerge, I think, for Boris Johnson, because how will he manage to provide a Brexit trade deal that simultaneously says, look, here's London as a kind of Singapore on sea, this deregulated low tax space, rival on Europe's border, something that many Brexiteers for a long time have advocated for, while simultaneously pleasing people who voted for Brexit, typically in the north of England, who want to protect industries like manufacturing, like fishing. How will he bridge both of those things at once during that trade negotiations? I think that'll be really hard for him. So yes, I think you're right. It's a win for Farage. It's a win for the far right. It's a win for Boris Johnson for now. But let's see how his political confidence is looking in a year's time as those negotiations, in theory, come to an end.
Nadia Massi, thank you very much. Sébastien Maillard, thank you for having been with us for this special edition. So we're leaving it for now. Stay tuned. We'll have a full news update for you at the top of the hour.